On the morning of his wedding, he uncovered a secret so dark it almost destroyed him. But instead of calling it off, the groom returned with a plan that turned the celebration into the ultimate stage for revenge. This is a powerful lesson about betrayal and true love. Kelvin was a young man with big dreams. Every morning he left his small one-room apartment before the sun was fully up. He worked long hours, chasing contracts, meeting investors, and fighting to keep his little company alive. Sometimes he came home with nothing but dust on his clothes and hope in his heart. Other times, he managed to pay his rent just in time. Life was not easy, but Kelvin kept believing that one day his breakthrough would come. Through all those years, he had Grace. She was not just his girlfriend, she was the woman he had planned his future with. They had dated for years, promising each other that once Kelvin's company took off, they would get married and start a family. She used to encourage him when things were tough, telling him to keep pushing. But slowly, things began to change. Grace grew tired of waiting. She started complaining more often. "Kelvin, how long do you want me to keep living like this? You keep saying tomorrow, tomorrow. When will tomorrow finally come?" One evening, with tears in his eyes, Kelvin held her hand and said, "Grace, let's just get married quietly. We don't need anything big. A simple ceremony, a small house. We can start there and build up together." But Grace pulled her hand back sharply. Her voice was firm. "No, Kelvin. I cannot marry and live in a small house. I deserve better. I want a real wedding, a real life, not this struggle you are offering." Kelvin begged her softly. "Please, Grace, just a little more time. I know I am close. I can feel it. One good contract and everything will change."
"I don't want to lose you." But she looked him in the eyes, her face cold and hard. "I cannot keep waiting for you, Kelvin. Other men are ready to give me the comfort you keep promising. I am done." The words cut him like a knife. He fell to his knees, his voice shaking. "Please, Grace, don't do this. Just wait a little. Don't leave me now. I swear my big break is almost here." But Grace turned away. "It's too late. I've made my choice." Within weeks, she was married to another man, a wealthy businessman with cars, a big house, and everything Kelvin could not yet give her. The humiliation was too much. Kelvin locked himself inside his room for days. He replayed their last conversation in his mind again and again, each time feeling like his chest was being torn open. The woman he had loved for years, the woman he thought would be his wife, had left him for money. That night, as he sat alone in the dark, he made a silent promise to himself. Never again would he trust any woman too deeply. But even as he said those words, his heart still longed for love. He wanted to believe that somewhere someone would love him for who he was, not for what he had. With nothing left but his broken heart and his dreams, Kelvin threw himself into work. If love had failed him, maybe success would not. Just a few months after Grace's wedding, Kelvin's life changed. The same contracts that once slipped through his fingers began to fall into place. One by one, deals were signed. Investors who had once ignored him now returned his calls. His company, the dream he had fought for with tears and sleepless nights, finally took off. The success should have made him the happiest man alive. He could now afford the life Grace had always demanded. But whenever he thought about her, married to another man, the joy in his heart dimmed. He told himself he was over her. It was around this time that he met Vanessa. She was confident, beautiful, and full of charm. She had a laugh that could draw attention in any room and a way of carrying herself that made people stop and look. Kelvin met her at a business dinner hosted by a client. She walked in tall and graceful, with a German shepherd by her side. "This is Max," she had introduced the dog with a proud smile. "He goes everywhere with me." At first, Kelvin thought nothing of it. Many people kept dogs, but he noticed quickly that Max never took his eyes off him. Over the next few weeks, Kelvin and Vanessa grew closer. They went on dates, spent long evenings talking, and she began to fill the empty space Grace had left behind. Kelvin found himself laughing again, feeling alive again. But there was always Max. The German shepherd seemed to hate him from the very first day. Any time Kelvin tried to hold Vanessa's hand, Max growled low in his throat. If Kelvin leaned in to kiss her cheek, Max barked loudly, his sharp teeth flashing. "Max, stop it!" Vanessa would scold, pulling him back by the leash. She would laugh it off and say, "He's just protective. Don't mind him." The dog's hostility unsettled him. "Why does he only act this way with me?" he asked one evening after Max had barked until half the restaurant turned to look at them. Vanessa smiled and touched his arm. "Oh, come on. He's just jealous. He doesn't like to share me with anyone." Kelvin forced a laugh, but deep inside he felt uneasy. Dogs, he thought, had instincts. They sensed things people could not. Why was Max so determined to keep him away from Vanessa? Still, he pushed the thought aside. After all he had lost, he could not bear the idea of losing again. Vanessa was beautiful, kind to him, and she made him forget Grace. That, he told himself, was enough. But in his heart, he could not shake the feeling that Max was warning him of something he could not yet see. As weeks turned into months, Kelvin and Vanessa's relationship grew stronger. She was everything he thought he needed. Confident, lively, and never afraid to speak her mind. For the first time since Grace, Kelvin felt like his heart could beat freely again. So one evening, under the soft glow of restaurant lights, Kelvin pulled out a small box and knelt before her. "Vanessa, will you marry me?" Her eyes widened, and after a dramatic pause, she smiled and nodded. "Yes." The restaurant clapped and cheered, and Kelvin's chest filled with pride. Vanessa became his fiancée, and wedding preparations soon followed. Kelvin threw himself into it with all his heart. He wanted to give her the life he once dreamed of giving Grace, but there was still Max. The German shepherd continued to growl and bark whenever Kelvin got too close to Vanessa. The first few times, Kelvin laughed it off. "He's just jealous," he would say, brushing the matter aside. "I'm probably overthinking." But as the weeks passed, the dog's behavior grew worse. Anytime Kelvin kissed Vanessa or even leaned in too close, Max would bare his teeth, tug at the leash, and bark like he was ready to attack. One afternoon, while they sat in Vanessa's living room, Kelvin finally brought it up. "Vanessa, after we get married, I don't think Max should live with us. He doesn't like me, and honestly, he scares me." Vanessa's smile quickly faded. She folded her arms and stared at him. "No, Kelvin, Max is family. I can't part with him. We've been together for years. He stays with me." Kelvin sighed, unsure of how to argue further. "But he's always aggressive with me. He'll never get used to it." Vanessa chuckled, then leaned closer. "You know, they say dogs bark at bad people. Are you a bad person, Kelvin?" He forced a smile and shook his head. "I have nothing to hide." She teased him further, laughing, but Kelvin felt a strange heaviness in his chest. Why did it feel like Max was trying to say something only he couldn't understand? Still, he brushed it aside. Love made him blind. He told himself again and again, "It's just a dog being protective of its owner. That's all." He convinced himself there was nothing to worry about. The wedding plans moved quickly. Vanessa wanted a lavish celebration, grand hall, designer gown, chandeliers, and all the glamour that came with it. Kelvin, on the other hand, had always dreamed of something simple and meaningful. But when he looked into Vanessa's shining eyes as she described her dream day, he didn't argue. Let her have her day, he told himself. If this will make her happy, why not? His company was thriving. He no longer lived in the small room where he had once begged Grace to wait for him. Now, Kelvin owned several houses and lived in a mansion most people only saw in magazines. Money was no longer his problem. If a flashy wedding was what Vanessa wanted, he was ready to give it to her. A week before the wedding, it was Vanessa's birthday. Kelvin wanted to make it special. He had already arranged a night party at a luxurious lounge, inviting a few of his close friends and some of hers. Everything was set: champagne, music, and a giant birthday cake. But Kelvin wanted to do something personal first. That morning, he told Vanessa he would be busy all day at the office. She believed him. The truth was, he planned to surprise her by stopping by her house before the party, to wish her a quiet, personal, happy birthday, with flowers and a small gift. As evening fell, Kelvin drove down to her place. His heart was light. He imagined her smile when she opened the door and saw him standing there. He had even rehearsed what he would say. "Happy birthday, my love. Tonight is for you." But when he reached the door, bouquet in hand, something stopped him. From inside the sitting room he heard voices. Laughter. It was Vanessa's laugh, bright and carefree, followed by another female voice, someone Kelvin recognized faintly. He had seen the woman with Vanessa once or twice before. At first he smiled. Maybe they were just joking about something. But then curiosity made him pause with his hand hovering over the door handle. He leaned closer, listening. What he heard next made the flowers in his hand tremble. He stood frozen at the door, bouquet trembling in his hand. At first he thought maybe he had misheard, but then Vanessa's laughter rang out again, sharp and mocking. "Can you believe it?" she said between giggles. "Kelvin actually thinks I'm marrying him because I love him. Please. The man is boring, weak. If not for his money, I wouldn't waste my time." Her friend gasped, then laughed too. "Vanessa, you're terrible." "I'm just being honest," Vanessa replied proudly. "He doesn't even know my past. Before I met him, I was living off men, different men. One man can't satisfy me, not then, not now. I get bored too easily." Kelvin's chest tightened. His ears rang as if the world around him had gone silent, leaving only her cruel words. Vanessa's voice dropped to a playful whisper, followed by more laughter. "Sometimes I even use cucumbers when I'm alone, because Kelvin does absolutely nothing for me, can you imagine? Even Max," she laughed again, calling the name of her German shepherd, "gives me more excitement than that man ever could." Her friend burst into loud laughter. "Vanessa, Kelvin better not hear this." But Vanessa only laughed harder. "Just wait. I'll marry him. Enjoy the luxury. Then when I get tired, I'll find a real man. He'll never see it coming. I have seen life and real men. Kelvin is definitely not what I want." Kelvin's hands began to shake. The flowers slipped and hit the ground softly. He stared at the door, his heart breaking with every word. The woman he had defended, the woman he thought would heal the wound Grace left behind, was no different. She was far worse. He turned away, his steps heavy, his throat dry. His first instinct was to leave, to disappear and cancel the wedding quietly. But as he walked down the corridor, his tears burning, another thought struck him. No, not this time. Kelvin stopped, wiped his eyes and clenched his fists. A bitter resolve settled over him. He would not confront her now. He would not shout, he would not ask why. Instead, he would wait. His mind was racing very fast now. He could walk away now, cancel the wedding and disappear. But that would be too easy for Vanessa. She would twist the story, play the victim, and move on as if nothing had happened. He thought to himself. No. This time, the truth had to be seen. With trembling hands, Kelvin pulled out his phone and began to record. He caught every word, the mocking laughter, the confession about her past, her boasting about using him for money, and how she never wanted to go back to the hard life she once lived. He recorded her comparing him to cucumbers and even to her dog, Max. Every cruel word was captured. When he was done, he slipped the phone back into his pocket, picked up the crushed bouquet, and walked away, his face pale and his chest hollow. Back at his house, he sat in silence. The bouquet lay forgotten on the table, as her words replayed in his head again and again. He remembered the good times, the dinners, the smiles, the nights he had gone out of his way to please her. He had given her everything she asked for, never once saying no. And now, this was his reward. That night, the surprise party went on as planned. Kelvin said nothing. He smiled faintly when needed, held Vanessa's hand, and let her lean against him while she laughed and glowed, enjoying her birthday. To everyone watching, they were the perfect couple. Nobody knew that Kelvin's heart was bleeding. When the night ended, Kelvin returned home. He sat on the edge of his bed in the darkness, tears running freely. For hours he wept, broken beyond words. But even in his pain, his plan remained firm. The wedding would go on. The following week, he dressed up in silence, his eyes empty. His friends noticed and whispered among themselves, wondering what was wrong. But Kelvin said only 2 words each time. "I'm fine." The ceremony began in a grand hall decorated with chandeliers and roses. Guests filled the seats. Cameras flashed. Vanessa walked down the aisle in her sparkling gown, her smile wide, her head high. She looked like a queen. She joined Kelvin at the altar, reaching for his hand, but Kelvin did not smile. He looked at her with cold eyes, his lips pressed tight. Then, when it was time for the vows, Kelvin gave a small nod. One of his men pressed play on the speakers. The hall fell silent. At first, people leaned in, expecting a love song or a romantic message. But what they heard froze them in their seats. Vanessa's voice, loud and clear,
Kelvin is boring. Even Max gives me more excitement. I'll marry him for the comfort, then move on. I can never go back to that hard life I left behind. The hall erupted in gasps. Some covered their mouths, others shook their heads in shock. Phones began recording. Vanessa's face drained of color. She shook her head wildly, her lips moving but no sound coming out. Then with a loud cry, she collapsed to the ground, fainting in shame. Kelvin didn't flinch. He had nothing more to say to her. Instead, he quietly adjusted his suit, took a deep breath, and walked calmly out of the hall. Behind him, the once beautiful wedding venue dissolved into chaos. Guests shouted, chairs scraped, flowers were trampled. But Kelvin didn't look back. He walked out with dignity, leaving behind the woman who had tried to use him and the world that had just seen her true face. Back in his room, Kelvin sat quietly on the edge of his bed. The wedding suit still clung to his body, but it felt heavier than chains. His phone buzzed endlessly. Friends, relatives, business partners, all calling and sending messages. Soon some of them came in person, knocking on his door, their faces filled with pity. "Kelvin, you're a strong man," one uncle said softly. "It's good you found out before the marriage." "Yes, a broken engagement is better than a broken marriage," another added, patting his shoulder. "Don't worry, better women will come." Kelvin smiled faintly, nodding. "I'm fine. It isn't a big deal. I'll be okay." He spoke with such calmness that many believed him. But it was all a mask. That night, when the last visitor had gone and silence filled the house, Kelvin crumbled. He fell onto the bed and wept like a baby, his body shaking with sobs. The room seemed to echo with the voices of his past. First Grace, "I deserve better. I can't marry and live in a small house." Then Vanessa, "He's weak. I only want him for his money. Even Max excites me more." Kelvin pressed his face into his hands, crying harder. "What did I do to deserve this?" he whispered into the darkness. Twice he had given his heart fully. Twice he had been crushed. Hours passed before the tears slowed. His chest still ached, but his mind began to clear. The money, the houses, the cars, none of it had brought him happiness. Instead, it had drawn women who only wanted what he could give, not who he was. That night, after much thought, Kelvin made a decision. It was time to take a break from it all. The next morning, without telling anyone, he packed a small bag. He left his flashy cars parked in the driveway, locked the gates of his mansion, and handed the keys to his trusted aide. He carried no sign of wealth with him. By evening he was far away, driving quietly into a simple neighborhood on the outskirts of town where no one knew him, and no one cared about his story. The houses were old, the streets dusty, and the people lived modest lives. For the first time in years, Kelvin felt something close to peace. He parked beside a small compound, stepped out with only his bag in hand, and breathed deeply. Here he was not a billionaire, not a man humiliated at the altar. He was just Kelvin, an ordinary man, ready to start again. He found a small, single-room apartment at the back of a weathered compound. The walls were cracked and the roof leaked in places, but to Kelvin, it felt right. It was simple, quiet, and no one here would look at him as the rich man. Later that day, he called Joseph, his assistant. When Joseph arrived, Kelvin handed him the car keys. "Take it back to the city," Kelvin said firmly. "If I need you, I'll call, but for now, don't disturb me." Joseph looked shocked. "Sir, are you sure? You don't need to live like this." Kelvin shook his head. "If I'm going to do this, I must do it right. I want peace again, Joseph. I wasn't born into wealth, and I lost my parents at a young age. I know how to be alone. I carved my path once, I can do it again." Reluctantly, Joseph drove away, leaving Kelvin with nothing but a small bag of clothes. For the first time in years, Kelvin walked the streets like an ordinary man. He wandered through the dusty roads, watching traders calling out prices, children playing barefoot, and men pushing wheelbarrows. He didn't feel out of place. Deep inside, it felt strangely familiar. Then, at the corner of the street, he spotted a construction site. Men in helmets and dusty clothes carried blocks, mixed cement, and shouted instructions. Kelvin paused, watching them. He had built his company from scratch. Hard work was not new to him. Perhaps this was where he should start. The next morning, Kelvin approached the site manager. "Please, I'm looking for work. Anything. I can carry blocks, mix cement, whatever you need." The man eyed him up and down. "You sure? It's hard work." Kelvin nodded.
I can handle it. And so Kelvin became a laborer. The first days were tough. His hands blistered, his back ached, and sweat soaked through his shirt until it clung to his skin. But he pushed on, carrying blocks, mixing mortar, and sweating under the hot sun. It was honest work, and for the first time in a long while, he felt clean inside. But the people around him didn't see that. The neighborhood women watched him return each evening in his dusty clothes. They whispered loudly enough for him to hear. "Another broke laborer?" one said with a smirk. "Look at him, looking all dirty and rough," another laughed. "He looks handsome but broke, too bad," a third added. Kelvin heard it all, but he said nothing. He only sighed quietly and went into his small room. They saw a poor man, but he knew who he really was. Still, as he lay on his thin mattress at night, he wondered if there were women in the world who loved men for who they were, not for money. Then, one hot, dusty afternoon when Kelvin left the construction site, his shirt was soaked with sweat, his trousers stained with cement, and his boots covered in mud. He carried his bag of tools over his shoulder, walking slowly toward the compound he now called home. Halfway there, the sky suddenly darkened. Thick clouds rolled in, and within minutes, the heavens opened. Heavy rain poured down, soaking him from head to toe. Kelvin sighed. He was already rough and dirty, now he was drenched too. Looking around, he spotted a small cafe on the corner and hurried under its shade for shelter. Inside, through the glass, he saw her. A woman unlike any he had seen in this neighborhood. She was classy, stylish, and carried herself with the kind of elegance that turned heads. Her hair was neatly styled, her makeup flawless, and her dress looked expensive. She sat with a cup of coffee, scrolling through her phone. Kelvin's heart skipped. She's beautiful, he thought. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to talk to her. But just as quickly, he shook the thought away. No, I've had enough heartbreak. And a woman like that would never look at a man like me, not dressed like this, not looking like a poor laborer. The rain began to slow to a drizzle. Kelvin adjusted his bag, ready to leave quietly. But then, the cafe door opened. The woman stepped out. She noticed him standing there, soaked and shivering slightly. With a soft smile, she held out her umbrella. "Here," she said warmly. "You need this more than I do. I'll use my car." Kelvin blinked in surprise. For a moment, he couldn't even find his voice. Thank you," he stammered, taking the umbrella. She smiled again. "What's your name?" "Kelvin," he replied quickly, his heart beating fast. "And you?" "Stella," she said, her voice smooth, confident. They exchanged numbers before she walked toward a small car parked nearby. Kelvin stood there, umbrella in hand, watching her drive off, his heart racing. By the time he reached his small room, he was smiling from ear to ear. For the first time in months, he felt a spark of hope. Maybe this is what I've been looking for, he thought. A classy, kind girl who sees me as a person, not just money. That night, lying on his thin mattress, Kelvin whispered to himself, "I'll try to get closer to her." The next morning, Kelvin stepped out of his small room, ready to head to the construction site. His shirt was faded and his boots already carried the marks of yesterday's labor. Just as he locked his door, he heard a gentle voice. "Good morning, Kelvin." It was Anita, his neighbor. She lived 2 doors down in the same compound. Anita dressed simply in a plain trousers and a blouse, her hair tied back neatly. She was a seamstress, often bent over her old sewing machine late into the night. Life wasn't easy for her. He had overheard her once talking about unpaid bills, but she carried herself with a quiet dignity that made people respect her. Kelvin smiled back. "Good morning, Anita." That day, when he returned from work exhausted and dusty, Anita knocked softly on his door. She held out a small plate of rice. "You look tired. Eat this. It's not much, but it will help." Kelvin's chest warmed. "Thank you," he said quietly. Another evening, when his shirt tore at the shoulder, Anita simply took it from him, mended it carefully, and returned it folded without asking for anything in return. These small acts touched Kelvin deeply, though he didn't say much about them. But his mind at this time was elsewhere, on Stella. After days of thinking, Kelvin gathered courage and sent Stella a message. To his surprise, she agreed to go on a date.
He was shocked, almost disbelieving. Maybe, just maybe, his luck had turned. The first dates left him smiling for hours afterward. Stella was beautiful, sophisticated, and carried herself like the kind of woman he had always admired. Kelvin tried to impress her in little ways, though his means were simple now. He took her to modest restaurants, held doors open, and bought her small, thoughtful gifts. But Stella's reactions soon revealed another side. When she learned about his job at the construction site, she wrinkled her nose. "So you just carry blocks all day? You should find something better." When he wore his faded clothes, she would laugh softly and say, "Kelvin, you need a stylist. You look too ordinary." At first, he brushed it off, telling himself she didn't mean harm, but each comment cut him. The worst came one afternoon at a cafe. As they sat together, a wealthy-looking man in a crisp suit and gold watch walked past. Stella leaned forward, flashing a bright smile. "Hello," she said, her voice dripping with charm. They chatted for several minutes while Kelvin sat awkwardly beside her, invisible. Humiliation burned through him. His chest tightened, but he said nothing. When the man left, Stella turned back to him with an innocent look. "Don't frown, Kelvin. You're misunderstanding. I'm just a free person. I talk to everyone. It wasn't flirty." Kelvin looked into her eyes, torn between doubt and hope. He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. So he forced a smile and nodded, but deep inside, confusion gnawed at him. Two women lived in his world now, Anita, who gave without asking, and Stella, who made him feel small but kept him chasing after her. Kelvin didn't know it yet, but soon life would show him which of them truly deserved his heart. One evening, Kelvin sat in his small room staring at his phone. He had been seeing Stella for weeks now, but she had never once visited his place. Every time he asked, she came up with an excuse. She was busy, tired, or not in the mood. Taking a deep breath, he dialed her number. "Stella," he said softly when she answered. "When will you come to see me? We've been together for some time now, but you've always found a reason not to visit." There was a pause before she replied lightly. "You know I've just been busy, Kelvin. I don't want you to think I'm avoiding you." "But you are," Kelvin said gently, though his voice carried a weight. "Please, just come, even if it's just once." She sighed dramatically. "Fine. Next weekend I'll come. Happy?" Kelvin smiled faintly. "Yes, thank you." But as he dropped the call, his chest felt oddly heavy, as if a part of him knew she wasn't truly eager. Meanwhile, life in the compound carried on. Kelvin found himself spending more time with Anita. She was different, so simple, so kind, so real. In the evenings, when the day's work left him too tired to think, Anita would stop by with a small meal or call him to sit outside and talk. They spoke about life, struggles, and dreams. One night, under the dim glow of the compound's bulb, Anita shared her story. "I lost my parents when I was young," she said softly. "Since then, it's just been me. I learned to sew because it was the only way I could survive. But one day, I want to open a bigger shop, a proper place with workers and machines. For now, I just keep pushing." Kelvin listened quietly, his heart touched. He too was an orphan, and hearing her words stirred something deep inside him. He began to notice things he hadn't before. Anita wasn't just kind to him. She was kind to everyone. She sewed clothes for children in the compound, sometimes refusing payment when families struggled. She shared food with neighbors, gave water to strangers, and always smiled through her own struggles. Unlike Stella, Anita never once mocked his dusty clothes or his job at the construction site. Instead, she would ask how his day went, and when he told her it was hard, she would simply say, "You're strong. I admire that." Kelvin found himself looking forward to those quiet talks with Anita. He admired her honesty, her dignity, and her hard work. At first he had overlooked her, dismissing her as just a simple neighbor. But slowly, day by day, his heart began to shift. The following weekend, Stella finally kept her promise. Kelvin had tidied his small room as best as he could, even bought a few soft drinks and biscuits to welcome her. He told himself this was his chance to prove that what they had was real. When Stella arrived,
Her perfume filled the compound before she even stepped into his room. She wore a fitted dress, expensive jewelry, and carried a handbag that looked like it cost more than his monthly wage as a laborer. Kelvin's heart raced as he welcomed her in, but Stella barely sat before she began looking around with disgust. "So this is where you live? A single room?" she scoffed. Kelvin swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "It's not much, but it's home for now. Things will get better." She laughed cruelly. "Kelvin, I only give you face because you're handsome, but I can't eat handsome. I need a real man, a man who can take care of me, not someone carrying blocks for a living." Her words hit him like a blow, but Kelvin tried to hold on. "Stella, I may not have much now, but I'm working hard. Please." She cut him off, waving her hand. "Save the speech. Look at these." She pulled out new shoes and perfumes from her bag and flaunted them in front of him. "My man bought them for me yesterday. A real man. What makes you think I would ever love you?" A small crowd of neighbors had gathered outside, listening. Humiliation burned through Kelvin's chest. He tried to stand his ground, but Stella's voice grew louder. "You're poor and shameless," she spat. Then, before he could say another word, she raised her hand and slapped him hard across the face. The sound echoed through the compound. Gasps filled the air. Kelvin froze, his cheeks stinging, his pride shattered. Before he could react, Anita stepped forward. Her voice was firm and sharp. "That's enough! How dare you treat him this way?" Stella turned, glaring. "Who are you to interfere?" "Never mind. I don't want to know. Just take him. Since you like beggars, you can have him." The crowd murmured. Anita is stunned. Kelvin stood speechless, his heart aching, his eyes lowered in shame. Just then, Stella pulled out her phone. "Baby, come and pick me. I'm done with this nonsense." Minutes later, a white luxury car pulled up at the gate. A tall man stepped out, and Stella ran to him with a wide smile. She climbed in and turned back to the crowd, her laughter ringing in the air. "You see?" she mocked. "This is what real love looks like. These poor people, once you pity them small, they start thinking it's love." The car engine purred, and with one last mocking laugh, Stella and her man drove off, leaving silence behind. The compound was quiet after Stella's departure. The neighbors had gone back to their rooms, still whispering about the drama they had just witnessed. Kelvin sat on the wooden bench outside his door, his head bowed, his cheek still stinging from the slap. The shame weighed heavily like a stone pressing on his chest. Anita came and sat beside him without a word. She didn't pity him with empty phrases or lecture him about choices. She simply placed a small bowl of water on the ground, handed him a clean rag, and said gently, "Here, clean your face." Kelvin looked at her, his eyes red, his voice rough. "Anita, why are you being so kind to me?" She smiled softly. "Because you deserve kindness. Don't let this rejection weigh you down. A person's worth is not measured by who accepts or rejects them. It's measured by how they stand after falling." Her words sank deep into him. He nodded slowly, unable to speak. That night, alone in his small room, Kelvin lay awake staring at the ceiling. The silence around him made the memories louder. He saw Grace again, her cold eyes as she told him she deserved better, that she could not marry and live in a small house. He had begged her to wait, but she had walked away to another man's wealth. He heard Vanessa's cruel laughter, mocking him as boring and weak, boasting about cucumbers and even her dog Max giving her more excitement than he ever could. She had planned to use him, then discard him. And now Stella, slapping him, ridiculing him in front of everyone, openly declaring she could never marry a pauper, before driving away in another man's car. Each memory cut him afresh. Kelvin pressed his hand over his eyes, whispering, "Why me? What did I do to deserve this?" But as the pain washed over him, another image surfaced. Anita, her quiet smile when she greeted him every morning. Her small plate of food on days he came home too tired to cook. Her hands mending his torn shirt without asking for payment. Her firm voice standing up for him when Stella mocked him. And now, her simple words telling him not to let rejection define him. Kelvin swallowed hard. Deep inside, he knew the truth. Anita had always been there. She had shown him genuine respect when others mocked him. She had treated him like a man, not like a wallet. If he would be honest with himself, he had seen it long ago, but had chosen to look past it, chasing glitter that never lasted. Now, in the stillness of his small room, Kelvin realized Anita was the true treasure all along, the kind of woman who valued people for who they were, not for what they owned. A small smile tugged at his lips through the tears. For the first time in years, hope felt real. Days turned into weeks after Stella's bitter departure. The sting of humiliation slowly began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength that Kelvin had never known before.
He no longer thought of Grace's betrayal, Vanessa's cruelty, or Stella's slap with the same sharp pain. Instead, his heart now found itself drawn more and more toward Anita, the woman who had never judged him, never mocked him, never asked for anything but gave so much of herself. One evening, as they sat outside in the compound under the dim bulb, Kelvin finally spoke. His voice trembled slightly. "Anita," he said softly, "I need to tell you something. You've been more to me than a neighbor or a friend. You've shown me respect when others trampled on me. You've stood by me when I had nothing."
"I don't want to hide how I feel anymore. You mean more to me than anyone else ever has." Anita looked at him, startled. Her eyes softened but also carried hesitation. "Kelvin, I don't want to be a rebound. You've been hurt so many times. How do I know this isn't just you trying to cover your pain?" Kelvin shook his head firmly. "No, Anita, you're not a rebound. You're the only one who has ever seen me for who I am. I don't want wealth or appearances. I want you. I truly love you." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Anita sighed, her lips curving into a small, uncertain smile. She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. Kelvin knew words were not enough. He would have to prove it. And so he began his courtship, gently and slowly. Not with money, not with loud gestures, but with sincerity. He helped her carry water buckets, fixed a loose hinge on her door, and listened when she talked about her tailoring struggles. Sometimes they would share roasted corn by the roadside, laughing at simple things. Other times they would sit quietly in the compound, speaking about life, dreams, and scars from the past. One such night, as the air grew still and the crickets sang softly, their eyes met and lingered. Kelvin leaned closer, his heart pounding. Anita's breath caught as if she felt the same pull. For a brief moment their lips almost touched, but Anita pulled away quickly, lowering her gaze. "I'm not ready," she whispered. Kelvin smiled gently. "It's okay, I'll wait." And he did. Night after night, his sincerity melted her doubts. Slowly, the walls she had built around her heart came down. And finally, one quiet evening, when Kelvin told her once again, "You're the only one I truly love," Anita looked at him with tears in her eyes, nodded softly, and accepted him. For Kelvin, it was not just love, it was redemption. The relationship with Anita grew in ways he had never known before. With her, there was no pretending, no masks, no heavy burden to prove himself. Their laughter came easily, their conversations were honest, and their silences were comfortable. One evening, as they sat outside the compound, Anita sewing while Kelvin watched the night sky, he realized something. "All this time I thought I needed wealth to find love. But maybe I was chasing the wrong thing. Maybe what I needed was right here all along and I was too blind to see it." For the first time in years, Kelvin's heart felt whole, and he knew it was time. Anita deserved the truth, the whole truth. He began to plan. A week later, Anita returned from the market to find a neatly wrapped box at her door. Inside was a stunning, elegant evening gown, more luxurious than anything she had ever owned. Beside it was a handwritten note in Kelvin's neat handwriting. "Anita, please wear this and be ready by 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. A car will come for you. There is something I need to show you. Kelvin." Her heart pounded as she read it again and again. She didn't understand, but she was curious. The next evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, a convoy of black SUVs pulled into the compound. Neighbors peeked from their doors in shock as Anita, dressed in the elegant gown, stepped out shyly. The convoy door opened and she was ushered in like royalty. She was so shocked she didn't know what to think. When the cars arrived at a grand private hall, Anita stepped out, her eyes wide with awe. The chandeliers sparkled,
Roses lined the entrance, and soft music filled the air. She clutched her dress nervously, still unsure why she was there. Then she saw him. Kelvin stood at the center of the hall, dressed in a tailored suit, his presence commanding yet humble. His eyes softened the moment they fell on her. Anita froze, stunned by the transformation. The dusty laborer she had known was now standing before her as someone else entirely. Kelvin walked forward slowly, his voice steady but tender. "Anita, I haven't been fully honest with you. I left everything behind to find peace. I wanted to know if there was anyone who could love me for who I am, not for what I have, and then I found you." Her lips parted, her hands trembling as she whispered, "Kelvin, who are you?" He smiled faintly, taking her hand. "I am a wealthy man, Anita. I have several houses, cars, and businesses, but none of it ever gave me joy. Only you did." Tears filled Anita's eyes. She shook her head in disbelief, whispering, "You mean, all this time, all this time?" Kelvin said softly, his eyes locked on hers. In that moment, the humble seamstress and the hidden billionaire stood face to face, not as strangers from two different worlds, but as two souls who had finally found home in each other. The elegant hall shimmered under golden lights, the air heavy with anticipation. Anita still stood in stunned silence, her hand trembling in Kelvin's, when the doors opened again. A hush fell over the guests as Stella entered, dressed in her finest gown, her arm proudly locked with her wealthy boyfriend, Joseph. She walked with her usual air of arrogance, her chin lifted as if she owned the room. But then, her eyes landed on Kelvin, and her confident smile faltered. "What is that lowlife doing here?" she whispered sharply to Joseph. Joseph's face tensed. He straightened and walked toward Kelvin with respect, bowing his head slightly. "Boss." The word echoed through the hall. Stella blinked, confused. "Boss? What do you mean, boss?" Kelvin looked at her calmly. "Joseph is not your rich boyfriend, Stella. He is my assistant. Everything he gave you, everything he flaunted came from me. It was all a test." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Stella's face drained of color. She staggered slightly, her voice cracking. A test?" Kelvin nodded slowly, his voice steady. "I wanted to know if you could love me for who I am, not for what I have. But all you did was insult me. You laughed at my clothes, mocked my work, slapped me in front of neighbors, and boasted about needing aerial man. You failed, Stella." Stella's lips trembled. She tried to speak, but no words came out. She turned to Joseph desperately. "Tell me he's lying." But Joseph only lowered his head, saying nothing. The hall fell silent again as Kelvin turned back to Anita, his eyes softening. "But Anita," he continued, his voice warm, "you saw me at my lowest. You respected me when others despised me. You treated me with kindness when I had nothing. You are the only one who proved genuine." Tears welled in Anita's eyes as Kelvin dropped to one knee in front of her. The crowd leaned forward, holding their breath. "Anita," Kelvin said softly, holding out a small velvet box. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend my life proving that you are the treasure I was searching for all along?" The hall held its breath as Kelvin knelt before Anita, ring in hand. Her lips trembled, tears streaming down her face, ready to answer. But before she could speak, a shrill voice cut through the silence. "Kelvin, wait!" It was Stella. She broke free from Joseph's arm and rushed forward, her eyes wide and desperate. "Please don't do this. Take me back. I was foolish before, but I truly love you. I've always loved you." The crowd gasped. Anita froze, her heart pounding, while Kelvin rose slowly to his feet. For a moment his expression was unreadable. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. "Love?" he said, his voice calm but sharp. "Stella, you are the biggest joker of all time. Where was this love when you slapped me in front of neighbors? Where was this love when you mocked me for being poor? Oh, I see. Suddenly you love me now that you know I am rich." Stella's face crumpled, but Kelvin's voice grew firm. "No, Stella, you don't love me. You love wealth, and that's something you will never get from me again." He turned to the guards at the door. "Security." Two men in black suits stepped forward. Stella screamed and pleaded as they dragged her out of the hall, her cries echoing in the air. The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads, others clapping at the justice of it all. When the doors finally closed behind her, Kelvin turned back to Anita. His voice softened, trembling with emotion. "Anita, you are the only woman who ever saw me for who I am. You respected me when others despised me. You gave without asking. You stood by me when I had nothing. Today, I don't stand before you as a rich man. I stand as the man whose life you changed with your kindness. Please give me the honor of calling you my wife." The hall erupted in applause, some guests wiping away tears at his heartfelt words. Anita's knees weakened as she whispered, "Yes, yes, Kelvin, I will." Kelvin slipped the ring onto her finger, and the hall exploded with cheers. Anita buried her face in his chest, crying tears of joy while Kelvin held her tightly, a smile breaking across his face for the first time in a long while. Weeks later, Kelvin unveiled Anita's new dream, a luxurious fashion house, bigger and more elegant than she had ever imagined. He stood proudly beside her at the grand opening, watching her beam with joy as her name shone in lights above the entrance. No longer just a seamstress in a small compound, Anita became a celebrated designer, known not just for her talent, but for her humility and grace. Kelvin had finally found peace, not in wealth, not in appearances, not in women who loved money more than men, but in the heart of a kind woman who had valued him even when he had nothing. Together, hand in hand, they built not just a life of luxury, but a life of love. And for Kelvin, it was the sweetest victory of all. True wealth is not measured in houses, cars, or gold, but in the heart that stands beside you when you have nothing. Beauty fades, riches deceive, and pride destroys, but genuine love rooted in kindness, respect, and sincerity endures forever.